My new job has some very strange rules. I remember my first day as a school bus driver. Even back then, I knew how important this job was. And then I found out what happened to the kids on bus 10. And that's when I realized that following the rules can be the difference between life and death. It was my first day of the new gig. I was sitting in the driver's seat of bus number 9 at the depot. I was feeling a weird mix of excitement and nerves. You see, I used to be a paramedic. Yeah, rushing into chaos, saving lives, the whole shebang. But after years on the job, seeing things you can't unsee, I needed a change. Something, less heart-pounding. Plus, with my kid off to college, the house was just too quiet. I missed having him around. The laughter, the endless questions, all the dinosaur talk, that sort of thing. So when the school district posted a job for a bus driver, I thought, why not? Kids are cool, and how hard could driving a bus be? So I sat there checking out the bus controls, and that's when Mr. Harlan, the guy I was taking over for, got on. He was this tough, lean guy who'd been driving longer than I'd been in emergency services. But his eyes were kind, like he'd been through everything and still managed to keep his smile.
"Joey, right?"
he said. "Yeah, that's me," I replied, shaking his hand. "I'm excited to start. You got any tips for a newbie?" Mr. Harlan nodded. He took a seat next to me as his gaze drifted over the bus, as if saying goodbye to an old friend.
"This job, it's different, Joey. It's not just about getting from point A to point B. These kids, they become yours in a way. You're the first hello and the last goodbye. It's important, he said.
I nodded, understanding more than he realized. Being a paramedic taught me about how fragile life was, how important every hello and goodbye was. Then he leaned closer as he lowered his voice.
"There's something else,"
he added, taking a folded piece of paper from his jacket.
"Bus number 9, it's different. And there are rules. Stick to them, protect the kids, and you'll be okay."
I laughed. "What kind of rules can a bus have?" I asked. Mr. Harlan didn't laugh, though. Instead, he unfolded the paper and handed it to me.
"Memorize these. I'm not joking, Joey. I've driven this route for over 20 years. These rules, they're not official. They're not something the district will tell you. But they're important. Follow them, and you'll avoid trouble."
I took the paper, full of curiosity. The rules were weird, to say the least. Number 1. Never look in the rear-view mirror when the bus is empty. Number 2. On rainy days, do not pick up any kids you don't know. Number 3. Remember every child's name. Number 4. Only let 3 children in on stop 8. Number 5. Do not accept gifts from the children. Number 6. Have the last child on the bus lie down until they leave. And number 7. Never leave the bus during your route. I raised an eyebrow, looking back at Mr. Harlan. "Alright, this some kind of initiation prank for the new guy?" He shook his head. His expression was dead serious.
"I wish it was, Joey, I really do. But you'll see, just trust me on this, okay?"
he said. There was a weight in his voice, a sincerity that you couldn't ignore. I nodded, folding the paper and tucking it back into my pocket. "All right, Mr. Harlan. I'll take your word for it," I said. He clapped me on the shoulder and started to leave.
"Good. And Joey, one more thing. The kids, they'll look up to you. Be there for them. Sometimes, well, you might be the only stable thing they've got."
Harlan's words echoed in my head. Was that why these rules were so important to him? Because it was something the kids needed. I read over the list again, and it was the rule about remembering every kid's name that caught my attention. I thought that was doable. I was good with names. So I decided right then, first things first, I was going to make sure I knew all the kids by name. It seemed like a good way to break the ice, too. You know, being the new guy and all. So as the kids boarded the bus, I greeted each one. I introduced myself and I asked for their names. Their responses were a mix of shy mumbles and cheerful introductions. By the time we were near the school, I had a mental roster going. The trip to Einstein Elementary was just like any other school route. Each street was full of neat houses and nice lawns. It was the sort of area where neighbors proudly knew each other, borrowed sugar, or threw block parties in the summer. It was picture perfect. And the kids were just full of life. They talked about homework, video games, and whatever else they were into. Their excitement was contagious. I caught myself smiling more than I thought I would. It was a nice break from the high-stress world of being a paramedic. No rush or adrenaline, no critical decisions. Just a straightforward job of making sure these kids got to school safely. The trip to Einstein Elementary went by smooth as butter. The school was a nice red brick building with a large sign out front welcoming everyone. I watched the kids get off with their colorful backpacks one by one. A lot of them even waved goodbye to me as they hopped off. When the last kid got off the bus, I felt really good about what I'd done. It was only the first day, but I already felt like I was part of their lives. Even just in a small way. I was just the bus driver, but maybe, just maybe, I could be the steady presence Harlan mentioned. After the kids were dropped off, I spent the rest of the day at the bus depot. While the kids were at school, I helped around in the dispatcher's office, spent most of the day doing paperwork and learning about the other routes. It was the sort of admin work I hadn't really expected when I took the job, but it wasn't too bad. I had my lunch break in the lounge for us drivers. It was just me, a sandwich, and a bag of chips. It was quiet and actually pretty nice. But while I was having lunch, a dispatcher came in looking pretty torn up. She said that Mr. Harlan had been in a car accident that morning, right after he met me. He didn't survive. The news shocked me. I'd only just met him, but knowing how he was suddenly gone, it really affected me. I kept thinking about how he used his last moments to make sure I knew the rules about looking after the kids on my route. His words felt more important than ever now. For the rest of my lunch break, I just sat there, wasn't hungry anymore. I kept thinking about Harlan and how much he cared about those kids. As the afternoon came, it was time to hop on the bus again and pick the kids up from school. I couldn't help but feel some sadness as I started the engine. Harlan's death affected me more than I thought, but I had a responsibility. I had kids to safely return home. I thought the best way to pay tribute to Harlan was to be the best bus driver possible for these kids. The afternoon route was all right. I was starting to get the hang of this, I thought. I was proud of myself, as I called most of the kids by their names when they boarded the bus. They seemed to like that. Some even smiled or nodded at me, which felt nice. It's the little things that matter, right? As we made our way through the stops, the bus gradually emptied. The noise level dropped with each group of kids that left. Before I knew it, we were down to the last kid. He was a short, orange-haired boy, sitting right near the front. Patrick Hooper, I think his name was. I noticed him glancing around every now and then, watching as his friends left one by one. And then it was just him on the bus. As soon as he was alone, he laid down across the seat. The sun was going down, and his house was still a long way off. I guessed he was just worn out from the day. School can really tire a kid out. Or maybe he had stayed up too late the night before. I glanced over, expecting to see him dozing off. But instead, I see that he looked more scared than tired. His eyes were wide open, darting around as if he expected something to jump out from the empty seats. "Hey, buddy, everything okay?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light. "Long day?" He nodded. Yeah, just tired." But the way he said it, it didn't quite match the look in his eyes. I remembered the rule about having the last kid lie down until they leave. Seeing it in action, it made me uneasy, especially since the kid looked so scared. What was he scared of? Mr. Harlan's rules flashed through my mind, and I suddenly wished I'd asked more about them. I kept my eyes on the road, looking at the boy in the rearview mirror. "Hey, just a little longer and you'll be home," I said. The kid just nodded again, staying flat on the seat. I focused on getting him home as quickly and safely as possible. We finally reached the boy's house, a cozy-looking place with a porch light that cut through the dark. Patrick got up quickly, like he couldn't wait to get out of there. "Thank you, Mr. Joey," he said. As he stepped off the bus, he paused and looked back at me. I hope that Mr. Harlan didn't feel any pain, and that he's watching over the bus now." His words hit me like a cold splash of water. How did he know about Harlan? "Hey, how did you—" I started to ask, but he was already running towards his house, not looking back. The door opened and swallowed him up before I could get any answers, and I sat there for a moment, trying to wrap my head around what just happened. How could he know about Harlan? The news had barely spread, and it's not like I mentioned it to the kids. I pulled away from the curb, Harlan's words echoing in my mind. I couldn't shake the feeling that maybe Harlan was still keeping an eye on things. Or maybe it was the kids' way of dealing with the bad news. The drive back to the depot was dead quiet. I kept thinking about the boy's words about Harlan and about the list of rules in my pocket. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of purpose. "Morning, Sarah. Hey there, Luke. How's it going, Maya?" I greeted each child by name as they boarded the bus. It felt good, like I was building my own little community. "I've got this," I thought to myself. And then stop 8 came up. I remembered the 3 kids who got on from yesterday. James, Ellie, and Marcus. Easy. But today, I noticed someone new. A girl in blonde pigtails standing a bit away from the others. She wore a muddy blue raincoat and kept her head down. I hesitated, remembering the rules. Only 3 kids from stop 8.
But here was a 4th, looking like she needed to get on. The rain had started to pick up, and she seemed so alone there in her muddy coat. I couldn't just leave a kid behind, right? That was my whole job. Come on, then, I called out to her, trying to sound cheerful. As the 3 regulars from stop 8 got on the bus, I noticed the blonde girl just standing there, not moving forward. Come on, it's okay, you can come in, I said, trying to encourage her. She gave a slight nod, but kept her head down. She slowly made her way onto the bus. That's when Patrick spoke up, the orange-haired kid from yesterday. Mr. Joey, you have to close the doors and drive. Now, he said. He sounded worried and scared. The bus filled with loud cries as the other kids started to panic too. Go, go, they yelled, some standing, some holding onto their backpacks as if they were the only thing keeping them safe. The noise level rose as kids started to talk over each other, some crying, others yelling at me to go. Confused by the commotion, I began to calm Patrick and the rest down. I told them everything was fine and we just couldn't leave someone. But then Patrick pointed out something I missed. Mr. Joey, look! She doesn't have a backpack. Please go, she's not one of us, he said. His eyes filled with tears. With the kids crying, I made a split-second decision. It was against every instinct I had, but I shut the door. I could feel the tension start to drop as soon as I started driving away. I saw the kids calming down as I checked on them through the rearview mirror. They were all huddling together, comforting each other. The rest of the ride was quiet.
And I was shaken deeply. Watching those kids panic like that, it hit me hard. I kept thinking about the girl we left behind and the fear in the kids' eyes. As soon as I got back to the depot, I knew I needed to find out more. I parked the bus and headed straight for the dispatcher's office. My mind was racing with questions. Walking around the depot, I felt more weighed down every time another driver brushed me off. They all seemed to believe the kids were just messing with a new guy. But I couldn't stop thinking about how scared Patrick looked. How could fear that real be a prank? Feeling annoyed about the whole thing, I decided to go right to the head administrator. I wanted to have a serious talk. I explained everything, the list of rules, how weirdly the kids were acting, and what happened with the blonde girl. But instead of getting the explanation I was hoping for, all I got was a warning. She told me that if I ever left a child behind again, I'd lose my job. I felt even lonelier leaving her office, but when I picked up the kids that afternoon, things seemed back to normal. The laughter, the chatter, the usual buzz of energy filled the bus as I drove. I allowed myself to relax, thinking maybe everything would be okay after all. The route went by without any incidents. I dropped everyone off one by one, until it was just me and Patrick again. Just like the last time, the kid laid down on his seat as soon as the other kids were gone. His body was tense, and I could see his eyes darting around. I couldn't just drive on, pretending I hadn't noticed. Patrick, why do you do that, man? Lie down, I mean. He looked up at me, his expression a mix of fear and relief that somebody finally asked. It's so no one sits next to me," he whispered. Who are you talking about, Patrick?" I pushed gently, needing to understand. He hesitated, then said, "The kids from bus 10. And the girl in the blue raincoat, she's from bus 10. Bus 10. I racked my brain, trying to remember if I'd ever seen or heard of bus 10 around these parts. Nothing came to mind. Before I could ask Patrick anything else, we got to a stop. He jumped off and quickly said, "Be careful tomorrow, it's gonna rain." And that made me even more curious. I nodded to him, then drove off, my mind racing. Going back to the depot, I thought about the rules. The rule about rainy days and not picking up kids I don't recognize really hit me, especially after what Patrick had said. But then, the administrator's warning to never leave any kids behind complicated things. Deep in thought, a quiet noise brought me back to reality. I looked down to see a marble rolling down the aisle toward me. I thought maybe someone had forgotten it. But when I stopped at a red light, a cough from the back of the bus made me freeze. Remembering the rule about not looking in the rearview mirror when the bus is empty, I fought the urge to look. Instead, I turned to face the empty seats. I jumped a little. A few rows behind me, I saw feet sticking out into the aisle. I was certain it was a kid, but it was someone I didn't recognize. I could see how thin and pale their legs were. "Hey there, you missed your stop, bud? I'll take you back," I said. But something wasn't right. As my eyes adjusted to the dark, I realized the kid wasn't wearing shoes. Their feet were bare, but they were so caked in mud, it was hard to tell at first. Something about it seemed very off. I couldn't just head back to the depot with the kids still on the bus. I had to bring them home. So I pulled over to the side of the road, leaving the engine running quietly as I got up to check. As I walked down the aisle, my steps felt heavy. When I finally got to where the kid was sitting, my heart stopped. There was no kid, just an empty seat covered in mud. And sitting in the middle of it was a neat pile of marbles stained with blood. Getting home later, I just couldn't stop thinking about everything that happened, especially what Patrick said about bus 10. My curiosity wouldn't let up, so I turned on my old laptop to see what I could find. Pretty soon, I found a newspaper article dating back 40 years. It turns out there was a horrible accident with bus 10. The driver had been drinking and crashed the bus. According to the report, the bus swerved off the road during a big storm. One child was taken to the hospital. The rest didn't make it. I remembered my days as a paramedic. That sort of thing sticks with you, especially when there's kids. But what really made me think was the rules. How did this all tie together? And why is my bus the only one that has them? It was pouring hard the next morning. The rain came down in sheets. I got soaked just standing on my porch. But I still had a job to do. I was going to be there for those kids and make sure they got to school safe. So I drove my route, picking up each one. The rain got worse with each stop. When I pulled up to Patrick's stop, I could see he was scared. I spotted a few kids huddled behind him. Some of them were shivering under umbrellas, while the rest held onto their raincoats. Patrick was a bit off to the side, all by himself. He rushed onto the bus, soaked and shivering. "I'm the only one at this stop," Patrick said as soon as he got on. He nervously glanced back at the group of kids still waiting in the rain. "We gotta go, Mr. Joey, please." But I remembered what the administrator had said about not leaving kids behind. Looking at the group of kids on the curb, they looked just like any other children waiting for the bus. They didn't seem odd or out of place, just wet and probably cold. Maybe their regular bus hasn't picked them up yet. Patrick was almost begging me by then, his voice desperate, in a way that was tough to ignore. But I couldn't just leave. I looked at Patrick and I shrugged. "Sorry, buddy, I got a job to do. No kid gets left behind." I moved closer to the open door and shouted to the kids still in the rain. "Come on, you'll catch a cold out there," trying to sound braver than I actually was. As soon as those new kids stepped on the bus, everything felt different. The usual morning chatter and laughter died down, and a heavy silence filled the air. I kept driving, trying to focus on the road ahead, but the atmosphere felt off. Then it began. At first, there was a quiet whimpering, which then got louder. I couldn't just ignore it. I turned and saw several kids, my kids, crying. Some were clinging to each other for comfort, while others were hugging their knees close. My heart dropped seeing Patrick all curled up, his face hidden in his hands, terrified. Right beside him was one of the new boys, a boy with dark, messy hair and glasses. There was nothing obviously wrong about him, but as soon as I saw him, I felt nauseous, like I was going to be sick right there. The kid caught me looking at him and smiled at me, perfectly innocent. All of a sudden, a loud honk snapped me back to focus. I'd looked away from the road for a bit too long and almost hit something. I quickly steered the bus back on course, and I took a deep breath to settle down. Okay, that was way too close. I knew I couldn't get distracted again, especially not while driving. The crying from the back didn't stop, though. The drive got harder every minute. The rain was pouring so heavily, it felt like trying to look through a waterfall, even with the windshield wipers going full speed. Behind me, the crying had turned into loud sobs. It was tough to listen to, especially since I couldn't do much about it while needing to stay focused. But among the crying, I started hearing whispers, the kids saying things to each other like, "Don't look, just don't look at them," and "You won't get taken if you just close your eyes." It made no sense, but the fear in their voices was real. And then, in the middle of all the panic and crying, somebody started laughing. It felt so sudden and out of place, I just had to look. The new kid with dark hair was laughing quietly. In another situation, it might have been calming, but right then it just seemed wrong. He was gently touching Patrick's hair. Patrick, meanwhile, stayed curled up, resembling a frightened animal more than a child headed to school. Looking at the boy made me feel dizzy again, so I turned my eyes back to the road. As I did, I heard a kid yell out, "I don't want to die," coupled with more loud sobbing. That was it for me. Hey, nobody's gonna die, especially not from a little rain," I said, a bit louder than I meant to. That's when Patrick finally said something. "How much longer till we get to school, Mr. Joey?" he asked. That's when I realized the drive was dragging on. We should have been at school by now. "Where are we now?" Patrick asked next, sounding worried. I wanted to answer him, but I couldn't. I looked out the windows, trying to work out where we were. What I saw made me feel sick. We were still on Patrick Street. That made no sense. I'd been driving for ages, but it looked like we hadn't gone anywhere. Patrick's voice, quiet but urgent, broke through my panic. "Mr. Joey, look at the rearview mirror." And without even thinking, I did. I looked up, and in the mirror, there was something very wrong with the new kids. Their clothes were bloody and torn, glasses broken, missing shoes, ripped out hair. Many had injuries that made it hard to even look at them. Each one was sitting beside one of the regular kids, the ones I recognized. They were the kids who were all curled up or had their faces covered. I saw one of them lean over from the seat behind me, a boy with one green eye left. He smiled, and he placed a bloody stump on my shoulder. I felt something warm running down my shoulder. Patrick's next words came as a whisper, but they hit me like a truck. "After the accident, they didn't scrap the bus, Mr. Joey. They just changed the numbers. This is bus 10, and the kids from that crash. They want it back." Another loud honk pulled my focus from the rearview mirror to the road. I almost clipped the car. How was I still on Patrick Street after driving so long, yet nearly hit another car? And that's when I just knew. The kids from bus 10 weren't just here to scare us. They were keeping us stuck on this street in this never-ending rain, trying to make us crash. I tried not to panic. I needed to keep everyone safe. I wasn't going to let any of these kids get hurt because of me. And then suddenly, a figure appeared in the middle of the road. It looked like a man wearing a bright orange raincoat. He was waving both of his arms above his head, as if telling me to stop. I hit the brakes hard just in time. And looking through the rain-drenched windshield, I caught my breath. It was Mr. Harlan. As soon as the bus stopped, Mr. Harlan walked to the door. I opened it quickly, still stunned. He got on, rainwater dripping off him. He went straight to the front and faced the boy sitting next to Patrick.
"Scooter, now leave him alone. He ain't yours to take,"
he said sternly. And then Mr. Harlan looked at everyone else on the bus.
"Nice to see you all again. Sorry it took me a while to join you guys,"
he said. It took me a moment to understand what he meant, and then it clicked. Mr. Harlan. He was the student who survived that crash all those years ago. Mr. Harlan faced the kids from bus 10, speaking in a calm, steady voice.
"Let everyone go,"
he told them.
"I'll be the bus driver from now on. So we'll all be together again. And it won't be like the last time. I'll keep everyone safe. That's a promise."
Then he looked at me.
"Joey, take your kids and get off the bus. You remember who they are, right?"
I nodded. I memorized each of their names like he told me to. I would have done it if no one asked me to anyway. I walked down the aisle, calling out to each kid by their name, the ones I'd learned and remembered. Sarah, come on. Jake, let's go. Emily, it's time. One by one, I took their hands, guiding them off the bus, making sure not to leave anyone behind. Finally, it was just me left on the bus with Mr. Harlan. He put a hand on my shoulder. It was cold, and it didn't feel like it was all there.
Joey, I'll bring the bus back home after I take these kids home. And remember, there's one rule all bus drivers must follow. And it's the most important one of all. I think you know what it is.
I nodded in understanding before I stepped off the bus. And there they were, all the kids standing outside together, clutching their backpacks. They all looked relieved, almost like they couldn't believe they were safe. I looked around, and I saw we were right by Patrick's house. I looked back at the bus and saw Mr. Harlan in the driver's seat, looking like he was about to leave. He caught my eye, winked at me, and then closed the door. The bus started moving, and I watched as the bus with Mr. Harlan and the kids from bus 10 disappeared into the rainy, dark afternoon. I felt the tug on my arm, and I looked down to see Patrick. "Let's go inside my house to keep warm. Mom won't mind," he said over the rain. I smiled at him, thankful for his help. As we walked towards his house, I took out my phone to start calling some parents. The rain was pouring like it was a hurricane. I had a feeling school was canceled today. But I still had a job to do. I had to follow Harlan's final rule. The most important one of all. Protect the kids. Hey, I hope you enjoyed the video. Special thanks to all my patrons. If you'd like to become a supporter and get the audiobook early access version of upcoming stories, there's a link to my Patreon below. Thanks for watching, and have a good night.